Are you curious about the ways that your animal behaves and why? Well, today I've got a very special guest for you, Marc Bekoff. He's a renowned world expert on animal behavior and emotions. And in today's show, we talk about the evolution of those animal behaviors, sentience, and the biodiversity of sentience, the importance of individual lives, why each individual life matters, the use of animals in research, emotional lives of animals, natural behaviors of dogs and cats, and how to nurture this for them, social structures, and we debunk the myth that cats aren't social. Plus, we talk about a hell of a lot more. It's a jammed packed episode. Enjoy. Hello, and welcome to the Natural Animal Podcast, where we share thoughts and ideas about the nature of animals, their preferences, their behaviors, their ways of being, to engender a greater understanding, respect, compassion, and love for all animals, companion, farm, and wild. And today I have a very special guest for you, Dr. Marc Bekoff. He is a renowned world expert on animal behavior and animal emotions. He's a professor emeritus of ecology and evolutionary biology at the University of Colorado, Boulder. And his main areas of research, they're very vast, include animal behavior, cognitive ethology, which is the study of animal minds, as I understand it, but we'll get into that, behavioral ecology, compassionate conservation, human-animal interactions, and animal protection. His work reflects his interests that center on the basic tenets of compassionate conservation, namely first do no harm, and the life of every individual matters because they are alive and have intrinsic value, not because of what they can do for us. Treating every individual with respect and dignity is the decent thing to do, Marc says. Hear, hear. He's written many, many essays. You can spend days reading his work online, as well as all of the books that he's read, well, I'm sure he's read a lot, but all of the books he's written. It is his essays you can find on Psychology Today, and his essays and his books speak to the topics of biology, philosophy, evolution, emotions, and behavior as they relate to animals, as well as human-animal relationships. Bit nervous speaking to you today, Marc, but welcome, Marc. I'm so excited to have you here.
Well, thank you. It's great to be here or there. Well, I guess I'm here, but
both.
it's great to be there.
And I'm just going to get right into it today because your work is so vast and covers so many. I mean, there is that central component of animals, but how I want to hear from, not from a bio, not from, I want to hear it from your mouth. How would you describe the work that you do?
Well, I'm really an ethologist. That would be a biologist who studies animal behavior. So I'm interested in questions about the evolution of behavior. When we say the ecology of behavior, since I do field work, we're interested in how behavior varies from, say, location to location for members of the same species, and also members of different species with whom they share, say, a home range or a territory. So it's hard to describe, but I think my main all the research I'm interested in really deals with the topics of, say, sentience, emotions, and somewhat cognitive skills, but I really believe that animal protection has to be based on what animals are feeling, what they're thinking, not what they know, because there's no relationship between, say, how smart an individual animal is and how much they suffer, and some people think that higher and lower species differ in terms of their value because the quote lower species suffer less, but there's no evidence for that. And as a biologist, the whole designation of higher and lower just goes out the window. There's no such thing as a higher species.
It's so true, isn't it? That there's this, this animal is dumb, so they don't feel like, the common idea of like fish, they
Yep.
have such little brains, they have no intelligence, they don't feel anything. And it's like, well, what have you been reading? Like, that's not true in science, right? And then you look at, obviously, you know, the apes and the chimpanzees and the gorillas, and they're considered to be the closest and the smartest, or the whales and the dolphins are also considered to be very intelligent from a human understanding of intelligence. But the mind and the emotions, they're connected, but they're not, what's the word I'm looking for? They're not, the mind is not indicative of how a being feels, right?
Right. And that's a great way of putting it. Yeah, I mean, you know, one might argue that the emotional lives, I would not, but I could see one arguing that the emotional lives of chimpanzees are richer and deeper than those of a mouse or a rat. But we already know that rats and mice will assess what another rat or mice is feeling and rescue them from a cage in which they're locked. And there was a really nice study that showed that rats would rescue rats from being trapped in a cage rather than eat chocolate. And so I'm not sure I
Do
would.
rats like chocolate?
But well, yeah, I mean, it's a treat. Yeah, I mean, but those are really significant findings. So one basis of my work too, and it follows in the tenets of compassionate conservation, is that the life of every individual matters. We're not concerned with species or populations or communities. We're concerned with the life of every individual because they have inherent or intrinsic value. So, right, when you were saying before, it's not what they can do for us, which is often called their instrumental value. It's their intrinsic or inherent value, and they matter because they're alive. I mean, it's not rocket science. It's their life matters because they're alive. It doesn't matter how smart they are or where they fall on some evolutionary tree, you know, or whether or not they're sentient. You know, some people go, well, we don't think that certain insects, say, are sentient, so it's okay to harm them. And in my view, it's not. They're alive and their life is valuable to them. And then people go, well, what do you mean their life is valuable to them? And then that's time to sort of go have a glass of wine, because I mean, they're individuals. They've evolved anti-predatory defenses. They've evolved parental, maternal, and paternal behavior. You know, they've evolved behavior patterns to get away from danger so they could feel safe. I interpret that to say they want to be alive. And then, you know, then people bicker, and I don't have room for it anymore, to be honest. I mean,
I'm not surprised. I'm sure you, like, it's like anything, you know, let's use, like, if you're a vegan, for example, the amount of times and people have the same conversations and they ask you this, or even vegetarian, and they ask you the same questions all the time. It's like, you know what? I've answered this question so many times. I'm done. You're never going to get me. So don't worry about it. But it's an important, I just want to pick up on what you said around insects. Even though in my show intro, I actually don't say insects, do I? I say companion animals, farm animals, and wild animals. But I guess you could put insects into the wild animal category, but they could also be companion animal because they do share our homes with us.
Yes, they can.
You know, I have ants, flies, wasps. I had a massive huntsman in my bedroom the other day that freaked me out.
Yeah.
You know, but it's like when you look at an ant or a spider, and some people who don't believe in emotions or don't believe in sentience, I know what they would say. But if you think about, if you try and, God forbid, if you try and harm an insect, which, you know, I'm not going to lie, I've done this before, like mosquitoes, ants, they hurt. And so, like, you know, and we can be so rough and harsh as a big human person with a tiny little ant. You know, I do save bees on the beach because, you know, the bees, and it's interesting, I digress, but this whole intrinsic and inherent value, I save the bees because we need the bees. but that's about
Oh yeah.
us, right? What about,
Yep.
well, it's like their value, their inherent value, their enjoyment of life. But the ants, or anything that someone might, whether it's intentionally or accidentally harm, they will move away from you. Like they're trying to protect themselves. And so, correct me if
Yep.
I'm wrong, I think that the anti-sentient people or the non-sentient believers would say that's just instinct. It's not because they're actually feeling anything.
Yeah. I mean, it, for me, like among mammals, birds, maybe vertebrates, that just doesn't buy. I don't buy it. I wrote a paper where I called it the quote as if disclaimer. They're behaving as if they feel, as if they care, but they don't really know. They don't really do that. And so that's why my argument is that, sentient or not, the life of an individual matters. And even, I mean, I'm sure that, and research is showing that sentience, I call it the biodiversity of sentience, is really widespread. Insects, crustaceans, there's a whole lot with cephalopods. But even if we don't know whether they feel or not, it's irrelevant to the fact that they're alive. There's people who suffer from, maybe different psychological conditions where they might not feel anything, or, neurobiologically, there's people who don't feel pain. That doesn't mean that it's okay to kill them.
True.
you know,
True.
um,
A very good
so,
analogy.
so,
Mm.
so, so for me, it's just really easy to say that, if an individual is alive, they deserve to live.
Yeah, yeah. So it comes back to
And it
their
might come
inherent
back.
value of being alive, of being, yeah, they have a
Yeah.
life. So who are we to
Yeah.
take it from them or to question it?
Right.
Mm.
Yeah.
Who are we? We should be, we should, in an ideal world, respecting all life, and that would come down to this equality of living beings, right?
Mhm. Yes. Right. I mean, in the future, we could be selecting for people who care about the lives of all individuals.
Totally.
But I'm not going there.
No, let's not
I,
go there. That's a whole other show, possibly a whole other podcast. Although
yeah.
it is a podcast about animals and we are animals too, so technically we could go there. Um,
Yeah.
what was
Okay.
your yeah, but we won't, not today. So I guess before I answer my next question, what is a day in the life of Marc Bekoff look like? Because I know you do a lot of field work, you do a lot of writing, you're also talking to a lot of people. I'm sure you don't
Um,
have an average day.
no. No, they really vary. I mean, when I taught at the university, because I left the university some years ago just to be on my own. I loved my job. Um, but I get up really early. I'm not a night person. I mean, I'll probably fall asleep at about 7:30 or 7 p.m. while I'm talking to you.
Okay.
But I will be sure I won't. Um, but yeah, I get up early and I just have a lot. The early morning hours are mine. I do whatever I want, no stress. I don't believe in rushing. And then by 6:30 or 7 in the morning, I can sit down and write if the weather's nice. I cycle a lot. I still ride my bike hundreds of miles a week when I can. And then I, do a lot of reading and writing. And if I'm involved in a research project, it depends on what it entails. Um, my days are really full, but not necessarily in an aversive way.
Hmm.
I mean, I really like what I do. I really like talking and writing and thinking about animal emotions and sentience and animal protection is
Yeah.
really important to me. So I spend a lot of time trying to harness what I and others know into protecting non-human animals, and not saying things like, well, we need more data. We don't need more data. It's funny because in the second edition of The Emotional Lives of Animals that'll be out in a few months. When I was going through the penultimate set of proofs, I turned part of the last chapter into what we call just an afterword, and my editor at first wasn't sure about it, but I have a section about how I get cranky. He said, you're being very revealing of your personality yourself. And I said, that's fine. People who know me know I can get cranky, but I get really cranky when we don't use what we know on behalf of other animals, and part of writing this book and is that nothing we've learned in the 17 or 18 years since this book appeared has said that we can treat animals with less respect or dignity or compassion. Nothing. We haven't learned that, well, rats and mice don't really suffer or don't really feel certain things, so it's okay to use them and, or abuse them in harmful research. And to me, that's really a powerful message that we've known long, like the 5 freedoms for animals that were put forth in the UK in 1965. So that's 65 or however many years old, I don't even know, but it's a long time. And so people say, well, that was just ancient and they're pretty weak. Well, they are compared to what we know, what we would want today, but they were really the beginning of the realization that animals need food and water. They need to be able to perform species-specific behaviors, and they need room to, if you will, locomote around. So that's what keeps me going. And I in the last part of the book, I just said I get really cranky when scientists turn out data and then they have these lame conclusions. Given what we now know, which means that we now knew it 100 years ago, probably, we need to treat animals better. So I do have a section in the book that basically says, yes, we do. We need to treat them. We need more action than words. We could stop researching animals today, and we know enough to protect every single animal on Earth.
Yeah, I guess that brings in that tenet of the animal protection, because your work, by sharing this information, it's a way that you can help protect animals, because, it's like the purpose of this show, right? It's similar in terms of helping people to understand that they do have their own inherent value, that they are sentient, that they do feel their life is valuable, even if they're not sentient, right? And we've got enough information. But you speak about, like, there's so many places I want to go with what you just said, and my brain is like, oh, I want to go there, I want to go there. But I think science is such a huge thing, particularly when it comes to the treatment of animals. I mean, there are so many sectors. You've got the food industry, you've got the research industry, medical industry.
Uh-huh.
There's so many industries where the lives of animals are impacted, and a lot of it is hidden from the public eye. Particularly when you think about food production here in Australia, no one knows what's going on because it's all happening in rural areas. It's hard to get to. It's all hidden. It's all in sheds, right? It's not open for people to observe. And so people think, oh, it's fine, But for me, personally, I have a problem with that too, but I have a really big problem with medical research, and have even come up against scientists debating this particular topic at a not very nice event some years ago in Sydney.
No, they're
and they just don't get it. And this was a debate about, do animal rights trump human interests or something like that. And obviously I was on the hello, yes. Yes, they should, because they have, you talk about the 5 freedoms, the basic freedoms, they have moral rights. And I hope we'll get to talk about morality today and how animals have morality. But ethical, and I always say ethical is really a subjective word. What you, I mean,
Mhm.
I'm sure we would agree on what's ethical, but there are plenty of people out there would disagree about what's ethical when it comes
Sure.
to the treatment of animals. But in science, and obviously you're working in the field of science, there, and you speak about it in your beautiful book, which I'm so Emotional Lives of Animals, and I'm so excited to get my hands on the new edition. Talk about that too. But in the first, the edition I've got anyway, you do speak about how in science animals are objectified, and I would love to hand over you to hear, obviously your experience and what you've seen, what you've observed. Why do you think this objectification of animals occurs in science?
Yeah, I mean, because in most labs today, there's been some changes. Animals are numbered, not named. So you have rat 2 and monkey 45 and chimpanzee 89, but you don't have Ruth or Mark or Sarah or Harry or Mary or Louise or whoever it may be. So numbering is really a distancing mechanism. You don't it leads to objectification, because numbers are objects, basically, and so things are changing slowly, not fast enough for me, but some journals are allowing people to talk about named individuals. We studied 30 wolves or 30 coyotes or penguins, and we name them, and talk about unique personalities. But when Jane Goodall went into the field some 63 years ago, and then she went back to Cambridge, she had named all the animals, the F group, like Feigen, Flo, Frida, and Flint, and the G group, and talked about their unique personalities. And she was basically told, we don't do that in science. And cutting through the chase, because I've talked to Jane a lot about this, but whatever she said was, well, that's who these animals are. They're individuals. We can name them, and they have very unique personalities. So the but in labs, still in journals, most of the time you'll still hear, we don't name the animals, we number them. So if you look in a mouse lab or a rat lab, snake lab, or maybe even, well, I mean, I don't know, maybe even a lab studying non-human primates, you see number 13 and number 18 and number 764, but you don't see a name like Jim or Ruth or Mary or Joe.
What are they afraid of? Like, they're doing it to distance themselves from it, but what are these, in terms of this mentality behind this disregard that these are living, feeling beings? Let's put a number on them. I mean, I think there would still be fields of research where they do that. If there are any, unless I'm just getting this from movies, there are any like human studies where they would say patient number 73 or something.
Well, I spent 2 years in an MD PhD program, and they do identify some patients by number, but it's for anonymity more than anything. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I mean, my experience with my doctor's friends, or if I have to go see the doctors, things have changed radically in the last couple of decades, where they actually talk intelligibly to you. They don't talk about something that you don't understand and say, we're putting you on this drug for 6 months, and the patient goes, okay. The patient has no idea what's going on.
So
but
it's
I
done
think
for anonymity, not to distance the doctor or the researcher from the patient. And
partially, I'm sure. Well, there still are people, and we know this, who will say, well, it's legal, or what we're doing to these animals is within the regulations of, whatever organization they're referring to. But be that as it may, it really allows for horrific abuse.
yeah, I
So
mean, the laws around animals are insanely cruel.
yeah,
You and I, we know that. And then, in research, you've got the 3 R's. What is it?
mhm.
Reduce the number of animals. refine.
Oh,
What
God,
are the three others?
reduction, replacement, and I'm drawing a total blank on the
I know.
third of it.
Refine? I don't
Yeah,
know.
it's refining.
It is
It's
refine.
refining. Yeah. Well, I mean, it's just good excuses for allowing horrific things to be done.
Mm.
Um, it doesn't focus through the people will try to debate it, but they'll say, well, of course it focuses on individuals. We have individual, say, mice or rats or chimpanzees or fishes or reptiles in our lab. But it doesn't, because the excuse that comes back is it's okay to harm or kill certain animals because there's many more like them among their species. But I always say, if somebody told me they wanted to come to Boulder because there was enough of me and they were going to kill me, I would say no, thank you.
Well, exactly. Use that argument for humans. Well,
Yeah.
there's billions and billions of humans. So why is it any different? Why are those human interests continuing to trump the interests of animals, especially in science? And I just keep coming back to, what are the scientists so afraid of if they actually feel something towards an animal?
Well, traditionally, you weren't allowed to put your feelings into, say, experiment, because it could contaminate the data. It's the same fear about anthropomorphism, which I mean, I know what it is, but I have no idea what it is. And there's enough studies now that show that being anthropomorphic allows you to be more empathic. But it's the same fear. It's traditional, it's cultural. My mentor did this and their mentor did this, and this is how we study a particular behavior. But by denying sentience or consciousness, say sentience or emotions, it opens the door for allowing you to do horrific things in the name of humans or in the name of science.
Yeah.
And in that early version of the book, and I have a couple of more examples in the new one coming out, writing about scientists who darn well know that the animals, say non-human primates who they're studying, they know the animals have rich emotional lives. They know they have feelings, but they'll often cash it out that we tried all the humane, non-lethal techniques and they didn't work. So, and well, maybe that's true, but my response is, and just go find others that work. Their response is, we got to get on with the day. So all the numbering and looking at animals as higher or lower is really a distancing mechanism that allows for them to do really nasty things to animals. Let's just not sugarcoat what happens to lab animals. I mean, it's, people forget, a lot of these animals are have a disease or a germ induced in them for which there's no cure.
Yeah,
I wouldn't want.
exactly. No, perfectly healthy animal. Very unfortunate that they've gone into this lab environment, or that they've been grown
Yes.
in this lab environment to be injected with, a deadly disease, or, any kind of disease, to see, well,
Yep.
how does it appear, how does it show up in the body? Could we use this thing to treat it? And with that complete disregard of the differences, and, you read and you hear about it all the time, the differences between, just because something is this way in a rat doesn't mean it's going to be this way in a human being. But we can't test this stuff on humans, because that's unethical, because humans are more important.
Yeah, right. Or so they say.
So exactly. Well, I was being them.
Yeah. Well, I mean, buried in that are a lot of implicit assumptions that we're more valuable, that we suffer more, that we're smarter, which means nothing, that we have more to lose if we're harmed or killed. But that's just ridiculous, because once again, look at the protective behavior of elephants and dogs, wolves, cats, I mean, various birds, fishes, I mean, they've evolved behaviors that that they can use to protect themselves and say other members of their species.
Mm. And I lost what I was going to say. Something came up. I was going to say something. I've totally lost it because I was listening, focusing on what you were saying.
It'll
um,
come back.
it'll come back. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Um, ah, also like the sheer waste, like when they finish the
Hmm.
research, if there are still healthy animals, they don't rehome them, they're killed. Like I was involved in a case many years ago where we were trying to save this one rat's life from this very prominent university in the country. That's all I will say because I'm bound to confidentiality.
Oh
But
yeah.
one prominent university. And so we went to court to fight for this one singular rat to be rehomed and to live with people in a home environment.
Hmm.
Um, and the arguments that the university put forward, they were just so baseless. It's like there's no health concerns around this rat being in a home. Like, what are you going to do? You're just going to kill the rat. Like, let the rat just go and live out the rest of his or her normal life. And I think we actually won that case. We saved
Huh.
that one little rat, and that was all putting forward that the individual matters. It's not about there are a gazillion rats. It's like this one life matters. And why
Yeah.
can't, if they're, sure, I understand, yes, well, you can't be releasing diseased rats if there's a concern that they're,
Hmm. Hmm.
diseases that the humans can contract. But if there's no risk of that whatsoever, why
Excuse me.
can't these animals be rehomed? Or why I imagine in my world there would be this massive, massive sanctuary for ex-research animals
Yeah.
just to live out the rest of their days in bliss.
I, I'm totally in your camp there. Um, but a lot of people think of what we're talking about are impediments to progress, impediments to science, and that, and some people think the rules or the regulations or the guidelines aren't strict enough. I mean, I know
Right.
some people who, I just think are sickies. I really do. I mean, it's just their whole day, their working days are consist of torturing rats or mice or other lab animals, and it's okay because we're following the protocol, which is lame.
Yes.
I mean, the protocol basically is no holds barred. Let's face it,
It gives them a
and
very easy out. We can do what we want.
I was going to say, give them an easy out. Very few people get punished, and they know that.
Mm.
And there's a couple of scientists in the States who are actually, putting the money where the mouth is by just, one recently closed a very well-known lab, and others are transitioning from, well, one woman told me this week who I talked to, from, animals to plants, and of course that opens up a whole can of worms about what we know about plants, but
They're
I'm
also living beings, right?
the what?
They're also living beings.
They are living beings, and and yes, maybe somebody would call me a speciesist. I mean, they do amazing things. They might have feelings. They may learn certain things, but there's nothing right now today that shows that they would be in our or other mammals camp, in terms of cognitive and emotional, and I say even moral capacities. Um, but we still don't know.
And I want to, if we have time today, I'd love to speak because I know that's an area that you're passionate about as well, expanding this, inherent value to the inherent value of plants as well. But in just one last question, possibly, I mean, we'll see where it goes, but on the whole research side of things, isn't it the case that a lot of these studies that are being done on animals, when you talk about, you use the analogy of a lot of people would defend it by, well, it's progress, right?
Mm-hmm.
This
Mm-hmm.
research is helping to progress, our lives and what we know and everything. But it's like,
Mhm.
isn't it true that there are a lot of these trials which have got they have no significance whatsoever in terms of progressing or improving our lives. It's not all about let's find a cure for cancer,
Mhm.
which who knows? And I'm not going to even say it because I'm not going to open that bandwagon. But in your do you have any knowledge or any experience of that can back that statement up that there are certainly research trials that have got nothing to do with progress? They're not going to progress the human race whatsoever.
Well, I mean, there's a whole literature on the failure of animal models, say in medical research. And I think, just to be fair, there's no doubt some animal research has helped humans.
Mm,
You know, it's the data, the results are rarely used to help, to help the animals, or members of the same species, because the lab animals are usually killed. But there is a major concern, and I've done some interviews with people for my Psych Today site who are working hard to develop non-animal models,
yeah, yeah,
because
yeah,
they'll work better, you
yeah.
know.
Like
Uh,
tissues and things like that that are
Tissue
more,
culture,
yeah.
just tissue culture, maybe even some work on humans that, people say, well, we can't do it on humans because, it might harm or kill them. Hello. um, but um, but the fact is that, you know, people vary in terms of what they accept as the estimate, but, give or take, 99 out of 10 drugs that work on animals don't work on non-human animals, don't
Mm.
work on humans, for example.
Yeah, but isn't there also cases where they'll do some research on an animal to see if an animal, what their ability is, or do they do this, or, how's that progressing human life? And the animals aren't signing up. They don't need to know why they can do this thing or how this works within them. It's purely like, it's this
Right.
curiosity, human curiosity, and that we can tinker and take animals apart to learn more about them, which there are pros and cons to it, right? Because it's like, if we know more about their abilities, it's also a way that we can humanize or and I always stumble over saying these words, but it does mean humanize, anthropomorphize. Is that right?
Mm.
um, the more that we understand how animals operate, there's a positive on that. There would be a greater appreciation and respect. But on the other hand, do we really need to know that, you know,
Right.
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I know you know what I'm getting at. Mm.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if you're getting to the question of, are there things that we know that we really need to know?
Oh, yes. Do we
Yeah.
need to know that? You know, do we is do we need to know it to the point that an animal suffers for the humans to have that knowledge? Because it's, yeah, that's where I'm getting.
Yeah. And my answer would be no. I mean, I think we're at the time now where we can tailor the work. Um, like I said, a lot of research doctors, a lot of, PhD researchers, who aren't MDs, are really working hard to replace animal invasive animal research with non-animal alternatives.
Yeah, yeah. And hopefully,
And,
I mean, there's been word of them doing that for a very long time. In my opinion, it's not happening fast enough. But then I do not have my finger on the pulse as when it comes to science. I'm not a scientist.
well, it's not happening fast enough, and they're not using what they know on behalf of the animals. So two examples that I write about in my new book, but probably many people know, would be that the Federal Animal Welfare Act in the United States redefined the word animal to exclude rats and mice, birds and insects. They
And so
actually have
then,
they actually have a statement in there that says we've redefined animal to exclude these animals. They who happen to be the most popular lab animals who are brutally tortured around the world.
And it's crazy because it's like, yeah, the legislators, they can redraft a piece of legislation to suit their will and to suit their purposes.
Absolutely.
It's like, well, science says that rats are animals. So, you know, there's this battle between law and science, but it helps the science industry because it means they've got more freedom to do whatever they want to these non-legal, right, animals. Like it's madness.
Right. It also helps the huge businesses that breed mice and rats and dogs for research. People forget about that. These are mega corporations whose job it is, if you will, is to breed animals to be tortured in research.
Yeah, and I imagine it's quite a profitable industry.
It's extremely profitable, and they wouldn't like that characterization, but that's what's happening to the huge percentage of those animals who wind up in labs, or breeding, rodents of different strains to see how they respond to a drug or to stress, or being starved, by the way, or being shocked so that they can't escape from the shock, by the way. So don't tell me these animals aren't being tortured. I mean,
oh, totally. And then it's also, it's like the food argument, right? And it's the same argument that people would use. Oh, but they're bred for that, or they're fed for they're bred to be food, or they're bred to be researched on. And and it's like, yeah, but that doesn't mean that they don't have emotions anymore, because they didn't breed them to take out the part of the brain that creates the emotions, right? Like,
absolutely.
there's no difference between a rat out there in the wild and the rat that's been bred for lab testing.
Well, I mean, the difference, of course, is the life that they have.
Well, yes, but I mean in terms of who is a rat, right?
No, not at all. No, but it's easy to, like, the question you're asking, it's easy to distance yourself and just go into intense denial. Well, they're only, during my time years ago when I was working in around some labs, I didn't partake in the horrific things, but you'd hear, well, there's a million white mice out there, so what's the big deal? Which ignores the importance of looking at individuals.
Yeah, exactly.
Or these animals don't really know. They're not smart enough to know certain things, and that, of course, has been completely overturned. I mean, rats form regrets of things they didn't do. For example, people, rats will rescue other rats in need who are suffering.
And have you how do you know that? By reading other studies or by actually observing?
No, I know.
I want you definitely to share about, what Marc gets to see that we don't get to see, like what you've observed in the field around those feelings, around those emotions, because that's really the crux of this conversation today, is to really demonstrate that these animals, all animals, they do feel, they do have these emotions, and you have the privilege. I mean, we get to observe the animals in our home, and some of us will get to observe animals in the wild. But and I don't know if this is the right word, but you're in a privileged position from this perspective. If you get to go out there, like you've been out there and observing coyotes, wolves, all kinds of different animals. And so I'd love to, the most memorable experiences that you've had and what you have observed. And this is just handing the conversation over to you, free flow, but what you have observed around different emotions and how that's been presented to you, and why these animals, all animals, why are they so special, and how similar are they really? And I'm throwing so many questions at you.
Yeah, you are.
But how similar, you're like, oh my, how am I going to remember all this? But how similar are they really from that emotional perspective? I'm handing the floor over to you.
Well, no, that's a good place to start. At the end, they're very similar. I mean, we don't need to use humans as our template against whom to measure the intensity of emotions or the sorts of emotions that non-humans experience. They experience them all, and depending on context, they experience them to more or less a degree. Pretty simple. Studying wild animals, you're looking at even members of the, say, comparing the behavior of wild coyotes or wolves to the behavior of captive coyotes or wolves, putting aside the ethics of captivity. Although, when I studied captive animals, they had been all rescued from horrific conditions, so they could not be released into the wild. So we learned a lot from them and took good care of them, but they could not be placed in the wild. Simple. But you learn that a lot of studies in captivity produce specious data because the animals themselves can't perform species-specific behaviors. For example, they can't scent mark. They can't, for the predators, you're not going to throw a deer or an elk or an ungulate into an enclosure at a zoo with wolves or lions, for example.
Of course, but you've had the privilege of seeing both, unless I'm totally mistaken. Have you only studied captive animals, or have you also studied animals out there in their natural environment?
Oh, gosh. I studied penguins in Antarctica. We did an 8.5-year study of wild coyotes in Wyoming, studied decades of wild birds in the what you're looking at is my view, by the way. And it's a nice, I have a nice view. And so those are called the foothills and beyond. And then you have the continental divide. So I studied birds in close to Boulder for 20 years. No. My research early on was on captive animals who had been rescued. So captive wolves and coyotes, some dogs. But then once I got to Colorado, and I took my position here, it was all field work. Yeah. So I'm out with the animals, and I do a lot of work on dogs. I just had a book on dogs published, and I spent a lot of time at dog parks or watching free ranging dogs in the mountains or on I guess they call them multi-use trails here where you can run, hike, or have dogs. So no, my work is really outside because I need to be outside. But the point too is when you have animals, like even dogs at dog parks who are more unrestrained than dogs on a leash, you see behavior patterns that are completely, some people think they're very new. Some people think that, they're unique to dogs off leash, but focusing on dogs, they're just behavior patterns that all dogs would do if they could. But if you're living cramped up in an apartment in New York City and you only get a couple of minute walks, even 10 couple of minute walks a day, you're not able to express your dogginess, if you will.
And this comes back to it comes back to the 5 freedoms. One of being able to express the natural behaviors, which in a domestic environment for, dogs and cats can be, and in very many circumstances is very limited because they're not, if they're being kept inside all day, if they're only going for that walk around the block, right? Whether it's a dog or a cat, because, some cats you can walk on a lead too, right? But, or you can put a lead on and they just sit out there and it's a very, very slow walk. I've done that. I did that with my cat, and it certainly wasn't an exercise walk. It was very slow pace, stop and start, right? But again, because that's around allowing her to express the natural behavior. Let's go outside and you be a cat. Let's go outside and you be a dog. And so you're going to see those different, when an animal gets to express their natural behaviors, it can be completely different or foreign to the human. And they're like, oh, why is my dog doing that? It's the natural behavior. Like I got asked the other day from a client, why did my dog bury his bone and not eat it? I'm like, well, because he's a dog and that's what dogs do. And maybe he wasn't hungry. Maybe he wants it to rot a bit and ferment a bit, and then he's going to dig it up later and eat it. But, a natural behavior for a dog, one of the behaviors is digging.
Digging is hugely what it is to be a dog. Chewing is very things that we stop these animals from doing.
Or we
If you watch dog,
admonish. Yeah.
yeah, and punish sometimes,
Mm.
like digging or chewing. I mean, that those are very natural behaviors.
Cat
To
scratching the couch.
Yeah, I
Yep.
mean,
They need
they
something
they
to scratch.
wild cats scratching the outside, right?
Exactly. It's a natural
Yeah,
behavior. Mm.
it's a natural behavior, and so the question is a really good one. They're being deprived of their catness or their dogness or their dogdom or catdom, and people wonder, and I think the answer is some do suffer by not being able to
Oh,
express their
I think a lot suffer.
a lot
And,
suffer.
and I think it's part and parcel of a lot of so-called behavioral issues in dogs and cats is because they're not being allowed to express their natural behaviors.
Absolutely. Oh, it's huge. It drives them crazy. I mean,
Mm.
imagine if you couldn't express your natural behaviors. I
If you were
mean, it
stuck in a
drives.
house all day and humans' natural behaviors aren't as vast or as expansive as cats and dogs, I don't think.
Um, yeah, I'm not. Yeah, I mean, probably not. But they're also not able to exercise their senses, which are keenly. They're very acute. People drag dogs along on a leash, saying nothing's there, and the dog is saying, "Oh my goodness, this is like Facebook." I used to call Facebook for dogs butt book. you
Yeah,
know
totally. The sniffing. There's so many things to smell. Just let me smell. No, let's go.
Let me smell, let me locate a sound, let me sniff the air, um let me um exercise my nose, let
And
me
you would
just
have
walk.
observed, you would have observed this, like even if they were captive, going back to your field work that with the captive coyotes, I mean, you would have seen you're like front and center observing natural
Right,
behaviors of dogs.
right.
Because dog,
Yeah.
wolf, coyote, they're very similar. Correct me if I'm wrong there.
No, 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 you're totally right, but the comparison also that's apt is looking at homed dogs and looking at free-ranging dogs. So a home dog, their habitat or their environment could be a living room, or like a condo or a home.
Yeah.
um, and they don't get to run free very often, if at all. I mean,
Mm.
some dogs never are free
Mm.
because the people either don't like dog parks or don't want to take them, or the people themselves don't go.
They are
I
also a cesspit for germs and viruses. Like if you want your dog to get sick, take them to a dog park.
No, not at all. No, I don't agree with that. And I'd rather have my dogs get a germ than go behaviorally crazy by
Exactly.
having to stay inside a apartment somewhere.
Yeah, it is weighing up the pros and cons of everything in
Yes.
terms of, well, there's the behavioral, the social benefits, feet on the dirt, because that's a huge aspect as well, right? Being able to touch the soil, connect to earth.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, in the work I've done in China, rescuing moon bears from the bear bile industry, um, the very first step some of these animals take, and they could be 15 to 20 years old because they've been just locked in a cage, having their bile being milked from their
Mm.
gallbladder. These animals have no concept of what's going on. Some refuse. They've, ultimately, many of them make it take that first step and then they're out. But some of them have no idea what it is to walk on grassy ground.
It's so sad.
They're, they're so psychologically ill, if you will. I
Yeah,
don't want to
yeah,
say messed up,
psychologically
but they're
damaged.
psychologically ill.
Mm. But
Um,
what does it, sorry,
no, no, no.
what does it, when we talk about the feelings and the observations that you've had in animals, whether it's captive or in the wild, and you speak about this in your book, The Emotional Lives of Animals, is what does it feel like to be a dog or a wolf or a coyote? Because I understand that you have done, is it correct to say that the majority of your work has been around, the canid species.
Yeah, no, that's correct. Yeah, sure. Yeah.
We've got a visitor here. Feline species. He's like, can we talk about the felines, please, guys?
Yes.
For those listening, my cat is here. So what have you figured that out? What does it feel like to be a dog, a wolf, a coyote?
I've only entertained those questions by looking, say, at what I know would be their social needs, and are their social needs being met, and their sensory needs. The social needs would be, their dogs are runners. They come from, all dogs, all domestic dogs come from a common wolf ancestor, and all the canids and the related canids like jackals and coyotes, for example, they're called cursorial species. They're running species. They run. That's how they make their money. So part of being a dog, and even if you're living in an apartment somewhere, would be getting the opportunity to exercise your body in a species specific way. But then you have the senses where they need to exercise their noses and their ears and their eyes. And that's a lot of dogs who are walked on a lead, for example, or get 5 minutes outside, don't hardly get, or nearly, they don't get what they need to exercise their bodies and their senses.
Yeah, and I feel like even more so this day and age, with all the new breeds of dogs that are forever being created, right? There's a lot of small dogs, and I think the small dogs can suffer maybe at a greater level because they're more inclined to be kept inside and babied, and they don't actually get to be dogs. And then there's so many issues that go along with that. But, just for the audience, because it's something that I believe, but I want to hear your opinion on it. When we're looking at the evolution of the dog, right? There's been let me rephrase that. Has there been any evolutionary change between, say, let's think of a modern breed of a dog, a cavoodle, right? A cross between a cavalier and a poodle. And any evolutionary change between a cavoodle and his ancestor, the wolf? Or are they just little bitty wolves?
No, dogs are no, right. That's a good one. Dogs aren't little bitty wolves, and they're not dumbed down wolves. People who think dogs aren't as smart as wolves, and dogs are fully as smart as wolves in a dog way. No, I mean, the way I cash it out is that all these animals have all these animals have wolf genes and wolf engrams in their brains, neural pathways. So there's still a good deal of wolf in a domestic dog, regardless
Even
of
like
size.
your little cavoodles and things.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's hard to imagine in those dogs when you look at Irish wolfhounds or Saint Bernards. But yeah, I mean, the dogs are all the same basically.
Yeah. Apart from the individual differences, of course.
Well, that's what I meant.
Yeah.
I meant genetically, and what their needs are. But yeah, they all have different individual personalities and temperaments. Right.
Yeah, but genetically, they're like little wolves.
Not fully, though. I mean, they still have wolf genes, but the genome of a dog is different from that of a wolf. But it's a good question, because even during 15 or 20,000 years of domestication, they still have those wolf-like inclinations, those wolf-like temptations, proclivities. And in the right situation, if it ever arises, they might express them.
Like, give us an example of some of those wolf behaviors.
Well, I mean, some that are very, off-putting to people, like would be excessive chewing. So Paul Paquette, I don't know if you know Paul, he was in Sydney he's a veterinarian who's also an ethologist, and
No, I
he's living
see.
he's living in he told me where he was in Boulder last year. He's living in he's moved from Sydney up north, but Paul really was telling me how important it is for dogs to chew, but it's one of the activities that they're prohibited because they take socks or shoes or clothes,
Underwear, yeah.
underwear and all that, because they like underwear. But wild canids chew excessively. So it's not an abnormal behavior. It's their, if you will, their wolf genes expressing themselves.
And what are they chewing on? I mean, I know they'd be chewing on carcasses, right? But what other things are they chewing on out in?
Sticks. Oh, I've seen wild wolves and coyotes and jackals and foxes chew on sticks, rocks. They might find remnants of bone, from a carcass or something like that.
Yeah, so I think for the dog people, it's about making sure that you're providing things to your dog that they can chew on, because that's part of their natural behavior, and then you won't get annoyed that they're stealing your underwear. Put your underwear away, for goodness sakes.
No, no, absolutely. Absolutely. I always say, give them something that they can chew on, that won't upset you, because of what they're chewing on, so give, I mean, I'm not even sure what, a lot of the bones you can buy, the dog bones are safe, but, real bones from a butcher can splinter, and dogs have been known to choke on them.
Yeah, this is a big part of the work that I do. It's about feeding the right types of bones. Bones are a natural part of a dog's diet, right?
Yep.
But it's about, often if you go to the butcher and say, I want bones for my dogs, they will give you leg bones, hip bones, shoulder bones, bones that are quite weak and prone to breaking, because of the stress that they've borne. So, but it's about how can what I always say to my clients, it's about replicating as closely as possible what their natural, their ancestral, their evolutionary diet is, in a way that, with the foods that we've got access to, in a way that's safe, but in a way that nurtures that, that's a natural behavior as well for dogs. It is chewing bones, eating bones, right? Because that's what they do. That's what their ancestors do. That's part of being a dog, and even a cat, little mouse.
Right. I mean, they're dog appropriate and cat appropriate behaviors, but they're not human appropriate. But we can't put our, if you will, we can't put our trip on them to say you can only, I mean, they're not humans. They're dogs or cats or whoever else is, living in your house. So for us to impose human standards on them is really, it's not fair. It's not just.
I'm so glad you brought that up, Mark.
It's just not fair.
Yeah, because people can do that, I want my animal to do this, or I expect my animal to do mine, even just pick up on the language there, right? My animal, which brings in that whole property. If this was a legal episode, we could talk about animals as property, right? But it's not. Save that for another day.
Right.
So I would like Max, my cat who's sitting here, but in the same way, it's like you'd say my child. So I don't necessarily have a problem with saying my cat. I'm human, he's my cat, right? We both belong to each other. But, I may have this expectation or this desire that he's going to behave in a certain way. But he's him. He is Max. He's not little Ruth. He's Max. So for me to be able to give, part of giving Max his best life with the most enjoyment that he deserves it, because he's just amazing. He's just Max, right? Not just, he's Max. And so right now he's like, even though it's like, well, I don't really want my cats up here whilst I'm doing podcast episodes, but he likes to sleep on my desk next to me when I'm doing these things, and that's what he's doing. And so I want him to feel good, and I want him to feel happy, and that's okay. He's not interfering with anything. He's Max. He's doing Max.
Yeah, you're giving him agency, the ability to make choices and the
Mm.
freedom, excuse me, the freedom to make choices. And that, I always think, happy dogs, happy cats, content wild animals who feel that they have more control in their lives and not always being told what to do. So
And in the wild, they have so much agency in the wild, right? So much autonomy because they're free, they're wild.
they are, but there's social restrictions. I mean, if you're a low-ranking wolf or coyote or a bird in a flock, you've got certain restrictions on behavior, but it doesn't necessarily compromise your well-being. It's due to the
Mm.
social structure. But
And
but yeah.
how is the social how what have you observed in terms of social structure? Because that's also when we're looking about, just we are still talking about the canids, but when you think about the social structure of wolves, coyotes, jackals, what have you, and then your domestic dogs, and there's so many different modes of training, right? Companion dogs, and there's different beliefs around, alpha dog style training. You've got to be the leader of the pack. You have to be the authoritarian. Train with punishment, not with reward. There's so many different styles. But if we think about, based on what you've observed of the social structures, the pecking order, so to speak, what have you observed in terms of what is the most natural? How does the social structure present itself out
Well,
with the wild animals?
it varies within species. I mean, wolves typically live in packs, but there are lone wolves or wolves who live in mated pairs or just pairs. And in coyotes, foxes, they can live in groups. They can live on their own. They could live as a pair. A lot of the there are social constraints and limitations, but a lot of it is dictated by available food. So there's a lot of, and people are learning this in many different species. There's a lot more plasticity and flexibility in lifestyle. But I think it's safe in my work to say wolves are more social. Wolves live socially more than typically coyotes or foxes. But it doesn't mean there aren't lone wolves and there aren't packs of coyotes, which I studied for years, or packs or groups of foxes. But there's a natural inclination or a natural drive, it could be genetic, for animals to live in a certain way. And once again, when you get back to dogs, who, for the most part, people control, except for, say, free-ranging feral dogs, they're not allowed to express their dogginess and their dogdom, their dogness. And that could be extremely frustrating, because people will say, well, we don't do that. I've heard people say that to dogs, and I'm going, no, we don't do it as humans, but dogs like humping and mounting and sniffing butts and doing all the things that people find offensive. But that's what it is to be a dog. And
Yeah. So coming back to that, what does it feel like to be a dog? It's about
you've got
being
to
able to
provide the
do.
opportunities for them to express dog appropriate, cat appropriate, parrot appropriate behaviors.
And you've got a new book that's just come out recently that is all about the dog, right? Like
It's
Dogs
You might
Demystified.
not see it. Dogs. Yeah, it comes out funky on my screen. Dogs Demystified. Yes. Sorry.
And so that's already out, right?
Yeah,
That's
yeah, that came out in June. Yeah.
So that would
Last.
be for all the dog lovers out there, people with dogs. I imagine that would be an amazing. I haven't read it. I imagine it would be an amazing book to read in terms of understanding around the natural behaviors of dogs and how we can support them to be able to express those behaviors.
Yep. It's it's organized A to Z. You can read it straight through, which some people do, or if you have a problem with barking or humping or mounting, you go to B, you go to H, you go to M, or peeing, you go to P. I mean, it's that I wrote it that way, and all the references are on my website. So you could go to the link for the references and just copy and paste them into the web, and you've got your papers. It's a handy book. It's a very handy book.
Yeah, I think I'll have to start recommending it to my clients,
So,
to my doggy ones.
Your
What
dog.
about and I wasn't intending on this to be focused around cats and dogs, but I cannot not ask you about cats because we have been speaking about dogs. And I'm
Mhm.
certainly a person who I only have cats. And it drives me crazy when everyone always just talks about dogs and not about cats, right? So we've got to balance this out a bit. Um, have you observed cats, and what have been some of your most meaningful observations of what it means to be a cat?
I haven't really observed cats very much. I mean, when I say observed in terms of studying, I love watching cats.
Mm,
I mean, um, one of the things that's coming out in the cat literature that I think is really important is that cats are not necessarily asocial. You know,
mm.
you can't, like, I was saying before, people go away and for 5 days and they say they're taking the dog but leaving the cat at home. The cats don't need me. Yes, they do. Cats are highly social. They're just different from dogs.
Yeah.
But a lot of what we're talking about now on cat behavior, cat emotions, cat cognition, cats are smart, they're emotional,
Mm. Yes, they
there's
are.
there's certain codes of conduct, but it's the stereotype people have pushed, because cats obviously come from wild cats who might not be as social as wolves, from whom dogs emerged. But that's being debunked totally, almost daily.
Yeah, and you can see it even with someone who, if you live with cats, depending on how you are towards them, there are plenty of people who have cats and just let them wander the neighborhoods, and maybe they'll come home every few days and it's like, oh, well, they're cats, that's what they do. It's like, well, I have cats and they're not wandering. They actually really enjoy being with me. Like, I've got one in here now, one is having some alone time, and that's, cats are amazing teachers for that. It's like, it's really important to have your alone time. They want their peace and
Oh,
quiet. But it's like they are also social. They do want to spend time with you. They do want to spend time
yep.
with others of their species when they're in the mood to do that.
Right. And one might argue dogs are more in the mood than cats to do that on average. I don't think that's necessarily true, because I think people get cats with a self-fulfilling prophecy. Getting an animal I can leave at home when I go away for 5 days or a week. I'm getting an animal. People say they're easy keepers, because of these misplaced stereotypes that they're asocial and don't need us.
Yeah, yeah.
But I keep up with it because I've done some interviews with people who have written books on cat behavior and things like that. And I mean, the general picture that's emerging is cats are far more social than a lot of people give them credit for. And certainly, they need social stimulation.
Yeah. It's like when I had my first cat of these three, she was I was working in a top tier law firm at the time, so I was often working late, and she started to react to that because she wasn't having enough social time. And
Right.
that's when I got Max. I'm like, right, we've got to get you a buddy because I can't just not work. I need to work, and this is the job I'm in right now. But I hear you. We need to get you a companion. At first, she was not impressed. What
Yeah.
is
I
this
mean,
little thing? Then she grew to love him, and she
well,
had that companionship when I wasn't there.
yeah, and dogs are the same. I mean, dogs might be on average more social than cats. I don't know what that really means, but you bring a new dog into your house, it's not always double the fun.
Mm.
So yeah.
How can we get to know animals better?
Um, there's no one answer, but we could get to know animals better for who they are if we give them the freedom to be who they are naturally.
Mm. And I
Um,
think that ties up a lot of what we've spoken about today anyway.
yeah, I mean, a lot of it, if you want to, not everybody's going to be able to go study wild animals. So find good videos, there's excellent documentaries and videos. and try to take so the other side of that is take the animal's point of view, understand their sensory capacities, understand their social needs, understand how they live in the wild, understand that they're sentient feeling beings. And even if they don't express their feelings, that if you think you're doing something wrong, you probably are. I mean, I really mean that, give them agency, give them the choice to control their lives, allow them to perform species appropriate, species natural behaviors. And read about them. I mean, people can go get a dog without knowing anything about dogs or cats or any other companion animal. So my book, Dogs Demystified, really is geared to that for dogs. Become fluent in dog, become dog literate, take dog 101.
Exactly.
But there's enough out there now for people who want to experience a life of wild animals when they're never going to be able to get there. There's some good stuff out there that they can watch.
And read too. Like this,
and read.
We have so much information available that we really can learn so much about animals. Now we don't need to go to a zoo or travel miles. We can open a book, put on the TV, put on the computer. There's so many ways to access information to learn more about animals, how amazing they are. Listen to podcasts, watch podcasts. So my final question then, which might tie in, but I ask all guests who join me on the show, is if there was one thing, and it could totally tie in, but I'm going to ask it anyway. If there was one thing you could change about the human-animal relationship, what would it be? Just one thing.
Less control and less domination by humans. More, the other side of that coin is giving animals more freedom to be who they are as individuals and as a member of a given species.
Love that. Perfect. That ties this all up so nicely. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Marc, for spending this time with me today. Might be back one day, who knows, but thank you. I encourage everyone to look up Marc's work, like in terms of getting to know animals better. There's so much information out there that Marc's done, and you review certain books as well that relate to animals as well. So it's a great resource. So thank you, Marc.
Thank you. This is always fun to talk about animals.
I hope you enjoyed spending time with Marc Bekoff today. If you would like to learn more about his work and explore it, you have got lots to keep you busy. Marc has written over 31 books, plus multiple multi-volume encyclopedias on things like animal behaviour. You can visit his website at marcbekoff.com. You can read a gazillion essays of his that he publishes regularly on psychology today. There is a mountain of information waiting there for you to explore, to learn more about the behaviors and the emotions of animals, because, that's really important. Because when we understand more about the emotions and behaviors of animals, we can honor them to a much greater capacity. So thank you for listening. I will pop links and everything into the show notes. If you loved this show, please share it with your friends. Please share it on socials and tag me at ruth.animalnaturopath. And if you're not a subscriber yet, please do subscribe. That way you won't miss an episode, and every episode is different. So thank you again. Have a beautiful day, and big love to you and your beautiful animals, if you're lucky enough to have them.